Hi, this is Jacqueline. No, that's not how I say that.
And I'm Courtney, and this is Caffeinated Crimes, and we're just gonna roll with that because that's got to be left in. It's got to be left in.
How many? Okay, this is our 100 and how many episodes?
64, 65, I don't know, high up there.
Say the exact same intro every single time. For some reason, it just did not come out of my mouth
You
today.
went into work mode. You were just like, "Hi, yes, this is Jacqueline." You even had like your customer service voice on.
Maybe I just forgot what I was doing because I'm so tired. I was like, "Oh, I'm in the wrong lane here right now," you know. So, well, yeah. So, welcome to that. I guess I don't need to think of anything else to talk about because that just gave me something right there.
Yeah, you created our banner. We didn't even have to try.
You're welcome. Like it
You
literally
know, we
sounded like
always
I was
talk
answering the
about
phone. Like, what am
You
I
really
doing?
did. You sounded like you answered your work phone. That's what it sounded like. That's how I answer when I'm like, I know someone's calling me. Like, hi, this is Courtney.
I can't wait to listen back and see what that sounded like. Because as soon as it came out, I was like, nope, that's not what I say. That's not the right
I know. You got it all
wow.
out too, and then it was just like sudden on your face that you realized that is not the right thing to say.
Oh man, that is really funny because and it's also funny because I'm the one that hit record this time, so it's not even like I was unprepared and was just like, oh no, like I like cleared my throat, gave the countdown, did the whole, and I don't know, but we had a very busy day today. So Courtney and I
Hmm.
went to dance this morning and worked out and then had two back-to-back children's birthday parties. So, it's just and it's the end of the day, my brain's kind of fried. So sorry about
Yeah,
that.
it's been a busy day. It was a fun
Yeah,
day, but it was a very
it
busy day.
was. Yeah. One of those nice, like, it's like a good tired at the end of the day where you're like,
Hmm.
really did a lot of stuff and, a lot of enjoyable stuff. And now I'm just tired but hopefully I'll sleep good tonight because I got to be up at like 4:45 to fly to DC tomorrow. So
Yeah. Just telling everyone where you're going. Just telling everyone where to find you. This will come
well,
out once you're back, I
by the
think.
time this comes out, I'll be back. I also scheduled my Uber for the morning, and I right before we started recording got a notification that a typically female name will be picking me up. So I'm like, oh, good. That's good to know. So
That's
hopefully,
comforting.
yes, especially that early in the morning. Sometimes it's like, but
Yeah.
it'll be good. It'll be good. All right. Well, I didn't really have anything else to say. I don't think we have any updates. Courtney, do you have any updates?
I don't. I was so tired. I forgot to look up if I saw any, and I don't recall any. So
No, I don't remember
we
seeing
are
any.
slacking today.
Well, we also did we record on Sunday last week or did we recorded during the week, right?
Oh yeah, we recorded on Tuesday, so we're only like 4 days later. So
Yeah. I was thinking that too. I was like, I feel like we just recently recorded, but
I also feel like because we're recording on a Saturday, I'm now gonna think I have to go to work tomorrow when I get off of this. So that's gonna be beautiful when I'm like sleeping in tomorrow. No offense, because you have to get up early for a flight, but
it's fine. But that'll be good. And at least you're not going to the office where if you were confused and thought you had to go to work tomorrow, you like would get up and
yeah,
go to work. At least now, like you'll
yeah,
sit at your computer and then be like, oh no, I'm gonna go back to bed. This
yeah,
isn't
yeah,
this isn't
yeah.
that day. Have you ever done that? Have you ever gone to work on a day that you were off?
No,
Me neither. Me neither. But let us know
no,
if
I've
you guys
never.
have.
I've woken up and been like, oh, I have to work, or like maybe like gone a little bit through the motions, but never like sat down, started working, never like drove
Yeah.
somewhere, like nothing like that.
After we started working remotely, one of my coworkers texted me at like I think it was like 10:30 on it was one of those like random holidays, like a President's Day or something like
Hmm.
that. Like and she like texted me, she's like, Are we closed today? And I was like, yeah. She's like, oh, I've been working all morning. I was like, yeah, girl, we're closed. You need to
Hmm.
stop. So yeah, let us know if you guys have ever done that. But yeah, I guess we are ready to hop into today's episode. It's quite a wild one. Look forward to hearing what you guys think about it. So our main source for this episode is the Find Jodi podcast. Several articles on their website, findjodi.com as well. the Des Moines Register, and also the 2020 season 44, episode 13, called Gone at Dawn. On June 27th, 1995, 27-year-old TV news anchor Jodi Huisentruit was running late to work in Mason City, Iowa. She was supposed to go on air at 6 a.m., so she was supposed to arrive at work between 3 and 4 a.m. So her producer, Amy Coons, called her around 4 or 4:10 when she didn't arrive, and Jodi answered and said that she overslept and would be there soon. But Jodi never arrived at work and has never been seen again. So June 27th was a Tuesday, and the weekend before, Jodi had been in Iowa City water skiing with some friends. So she returned home on Sunday morning. She spoke with her mother and told her how much fun she had over the weekend, and that she was looking forward to seeing her mom during the upcoming weekend, because she was supposed to travel to see her. And on Monday morning, Jodi anchored the 6 a.m. news show and then left work around 9 a.m. to go to a Chamber of Commerce golf tournament. So it did end up raining during the tournament. Like, it kind of got rained out. So Jodi went home to change clothes and then went back where she had dinner with some of the Chamber of Commerce members at the tournament. So like the tournament kind of got rained out and they ended up having like a dinner kind of instead. So she arrived home that night between 8 and 8:24 p.m. And we know the exact time because at 8:24 p.m., Jodi called her friend Kelly, who lived out of state. But Kelly wasn't home, so Jodi just spoke to her husband for a few minutes, just kind of catching up with him. And when they hung up the phone, she's like, "Don't worry about Kelly calling me back. Like, I'm about to go to bed soon." Because remember, she has to be at work at 3 to 4 a.m. So, since Jodi and her producer Amy were both supposed to arrive at work by 4 a.m. to get ready for the 6 a.m. news show, they had an agreement that if the other was ever late because they overslept, like, they would call the other one and wake them up. So it wasn't unusual for Amy to call Jodi at 4 a.m. to be like, "Hey, you overslept, like, you need to get here." I mean, you're having to wake up, before 3 a.m. So not really unusual that you would oversleep a few times.
This makes me think of my dad when he worked at a restaurant, was really good friends with the overnight like janitor. And so like my dad would always like call him and like make sure he hadn't like fallen asleep in the restaurant and been like, "Hey, they're coming in, make sure to get up. Like bosses will be there soon."
That's funny. So when Amy called Jodi just after 4, Jodi's like, "Oh no, I overslept. I'll grab my stuff and I'll be right there." And because she was an anchor, she would often like get camera ready after she got to work. So she said she would like get up, shower, grab her clothes, and then take all of her stuff with her to work to like fully get ready because, she doesn't have the luxury of just hopping into work like the rest of us do. Like, she has to have like a full face of makeup and like her hair all perfect. And so she would usually do that stuff at work. So by 4:30, Jodi still had not arrived, so Amy tried calling her again, and then she called her again at 5 o'clock, and Jodi didn't answer either time. So at this point, she's like, well, she's probably like on her way, and that's why she's not answering. But when she hadn't arrived to work by the 6 a.m. news show, Amy went on the air in her place. And even though Jodi had overslept a few times and been late to work before, she had never like been so late that she missed a show. So when the show ended at 7 a.m. and no one had seen or heard from Jodi yet, Amy Coons did contact police for a welfare check at 7:13 a.m. And Officer Jerry Miller was dispatched to the key apartments where Jodi lived at 7:16 a.m. So also around 7:20 a.m., someone named John called the newsroom and asked to speak to Jodi. So Amy remembers this because at this point, like, she had already called the police. So like she was kind of concerned for Jodi anyway. And she told the man that Jodi wasn't there. And he asked like where she was, if she was sick, like why she wasn't at work that day, just kind of questioning like why Jodi wasn't available. And this man who called the newsroom has never been identified. So when police arrived at Jodi's apartment, her red Mazda Miata was parked outside of her apartment just a few steps from the staircase. So she had bought herself this car sometime around her birthday, which was June 5th, just a few weeks before. It was purchased as a private transaction, like with a car salesman. So the paperwork was done through the dealership the salesman worked at, but he like sold it to Jodi privately, probably as a favor to a friend, kind of reduce some of the dealership fees. And she had not yet transferred the title of the car into her name on June 27th. And because this was like, a red, like, sports car, like very kind of flashy, it was a distinctive car that someone could have like recognized as belonging to Jodi. So Jodi's apartment was empty, and when police arrived, they immediately noticed signs of a struggle around her car. So there were drag marks near her car, and her car key was bent either like inside the lock of her car door or like laying in the parking lot bent. So sources have like two different scenarios of what happened, but either way, it appears that like she was putting her key into the car door, and it like in a struggle got bent, so that like the key is now bent. The contents of her bag, such as hairspray, lipstick, red high-heeled shoes, and her hairdryer were all found scattered across the pavement, and her driver's side mirror was turned outward. So clearly, like, something happened to Jodi at her car. Police now believe that Jodi was abducted outside of her apartment sometime between 4:10 and 4:30 a.m. because those were between the two calls when Amy called when she answered and then when she did not answer. So there was no blood or like any signs of like injury or anything. So they did wonder if Jodi had been like ambushed and caught off guard and like grabbed quickly. Like maybe she was even knocked unconscious immediately. Like you just see like the drag marks. And because her car was parked so close to the staircase, investigators do believe that someone had been waiting there for her. So Jodi did have a normal routine, so it wouldn't be hard to figure out what time of day she always left for work. Like I just said, her car was also pretty recognizable, and none of the neighbors had contacted police or reported hearing like a struggle or seeing anything unusual. And it had been 3 hours from the time police assumed Jodi was abducted to when they actually arrived. So Jodi and her captor did have plenty of time to like get far away. They could have traveled as far as like 200 miles during that time. And a palm print was recovered from Jodi's car. It's undetermined whether that palm print belonged to the kidnapper or just someone who had like previously been in Jodi's car, but either way, it has never been matched to anyone. A single strand of hair was also found, but police have never shared if a root was attached to be able to be tested for DNA. We don't really know if it's like usable as a piece of evidence. And it's also unsure if the hair belongs, again, to the abductor or just someone who was in Jodi's car. Like, of course, this isn't like a pristine crime scene where you're not going to have anything from anyone else. Like, who knows who these things belong to. But another interesting thing that police noticed was that Jodi's toilet seat was up, and she did not live with the man. So some people think this is indicative of her like having a male visitor, but also like maybe she had been like cleaning it the night before, like maybe she felt sick and she like lifted the lid, like that's a very big assumption based on a small something. There were also two 16-ounce cans of Budweiser Light that were upside down in her sink, and then 2 wine glasses on the sink. But again, she lived alone as far as we know, and the 2 wine glasses could indicate that she had a visitor, or it could just be like, oh, I had a glass of wine this night and I haven't washed dishes yet and I had another glass of wine the next night, or, oh, I forgot where I left that glass. I got another one, like,
yeah,
it doesn't really show for sure that someone was there. But also, so there's that information, but according to the apartment manager who let police in to do the welfare check, Jodi's apartment was immaculate. There were no beer cans, no dirty dishes. So police records say one thing, the apartment manager remembers another, which not to side with police because, but I feel like they also like take notes, and I feel like the apartment manager was probably not like taking notes. So like her memory. I also wonder if
there were like pictures. Like a lot of times, like you'll come in and take pictures and stuff, and like you said, like written note where memory's not as well, and he could also be remembering a different time that he came into Jodi's apartment and it was spotless. Like
exactly,
that makes me think of the revisionist history episode where he was like, I remember where I was the week, like the day of 9/11, and then his like person was like, no, that was like the weekend before or after or something. You know what I mean? Like
exactly,
something like that where you're just like combining 2 memories together.
Yeah, definitely. I also forgot to mention this part, but with the toilet seat, some people too are like, well, did one of the like male police officers like use her toilet while he was there? Because they're like, this is the 90s, like it wouldn't be unheard of. I think it was an FBI profiler that they spoke to at some point in the podcast that she's like, I've been at crime scenes where like detectives have used the bathroom. So she's like, even though it's not protocol, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. Yeah. So while police are processing the scene, a man approaches them and tells them that he is Jodi's friend, John Van Cise. And he tells authorities that Jodi had come over to his house sometime around 8 p.m. the night before to watch a home video of a surprise birthday party that he threw her a few weeks ago. So he said the video was about 15 minutes long, and then she went home shortly after watching it. Which is also just funny thinking about the 90s and like, oh, like I like took some shots from your birthday party, like come over and watch it. And now it's like, I just immediately text you the video, like while we're still at the party.
Yeah.
So the search for Jodi started immediately, including the river behind the apartment complex. And also there's like a park behind the river. So they're kind of searching the whole area. They're not really sure at this point if they're looking for evidence or Jodi's body or both. Like they have no idea what the situation is. But the search started expanding further away as they continued not finding anything in close proximity, and Jodi's information was shared with nearby counties and other parts of the state in case her abductor had taken her somewhere else. So as the search for Jodi was underway, many people started wondering who was Jodi Huisentruit. So Jodi had many friends and was very popular. She was born in 1968 and grew up in Long Prairie, Minnesota. She went to college at State Cloud University, and one of her professors said she was just vibrant, just like so invested in her education and like loved learning and loved being there. She got an internship at a news station in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and after graduating college, she briefly worked as a flight attendant for Northwest Airlines. But she soon realized that she wanted to go back to journalism, and she had said that she belonged on the air instead of in the air, which I thought was funny. So she moved to Mason City, Iowa 2 years before her disappearance when she was offered the anchor job at KIMT, which is the CBS affiliate in Mason City. She would often write her friends and family handwritten notes, and she always remembered to like send cards for birthdays and other holidays. Jodi really enjoyed warm weather and hoped to move somewhere warmer one day. And she told friends like maybe like Arizona or Florida. And many speculated that her buying this like warm weather type sports car was indicative of her plans to move soon. Cause like it's not really a Midwestern winter vehicle, your Miata. And Jodi wrote in her journal that she was seeking another job and just kind of had like feelers out there with news stations in other states. She did have a heavy Minnesota accent that she was working on like getting rid of so that she could work in other markets because in journalism, it's like, oh, it's kind of charming for like the local news in like Iowa and Minnesota. But if you're trying to go elsewhere, kind of something that you typically are taught to try to minimize. Mm-hmm. Jodi really enjoyed playing golf as she had done the day before she disappeared. And friends say that Jodi just loved being on air, telling stories, connecting with people. She had dreams of being a famous national talk show host one day. She didn't really have any interest in like investigative reporting, like those like deep stories and like crime stuff. Like she just liked the happy stories that brought people joy. And her career was the top priority in her life. She was always like networking, like trying to seek out bigger job opportunities. She really built relationships with the community and was very well known. She was actually supposed to be in a friend's wedding the weekend after she disappeared. Again, she just had a lot of friends and was very close to a lot of people. Jodi did date casually, but she didn't have any known serious long-term relationships. She did want to get married and have children eventually, but it wasn't like a short-term goal for her. She also really enjoyed listening to like motivational speakers and reading self-help books and was just always trying to improve herself and her work skills.
So Jodi's typical work shift was 3 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. She was close to another anchor at the news station named Robin, and they would hang out together on the weekends and meet for lunch or dinner during the week. Robin said it was devastating that the first time Jodi was on national news like she dreamed of was when her disappearance was covered. So investigators started interviewing everyone who knew Jodi. So 2 of her neighbors came forward independently, said they had recently noticed Bud Light cans lined up in front of Jodi's apartment. There was a trash can just a few feet away, so they don't really know why someone would just like leave them there, but also line them up like that. Like if you're just like throwing them not in the trash can, like why would you do that? And one of the neighbors said he left for work around the same time as Jodi in the morning and could see her getting ready. He wondered if someone had been sitting outside Jodi's apartment, drinking beer and watching her. The random Bud Light cans never appeared again after Jodi's disappearance. Another neighbor claimed to hear some screaming in the parking lot early that morning, but thought it was coming from a nearby campground. So many apartments faced the parking lot. So Jodi's captor took a chance on someone seeing him kidnap Jodi. I mean, it was very early, but people come in and out at all times. You never know. And Jodi also should have left her apartment an hour earlier, meaning if someone was planning on abducting her, they would have had to wait around an hour, like waiting to kidnap her. They'd have to wait like a really long time. Some people who were at the golf tournament with Jodi the day before said she mentioned that she'd been getting some weird calls and was going to change her phone number. And this led police to wonder if Jodi had a stalker. And because she was so well loved by the community and was in the public eye, someone may have thought they had a relationship with Jodi when they really didn't. Kind of like people become really infatuated with people they see on TV, kind of like think we're best friends because they see them every day. So her name, phone number, and address was in the public phone book, and many believed that whoever abducted Jodi had been waiting outside her apartment for her. However, if someone had been following her, watching her from like her parking lot, and then waiting around the morning of June 27th to abduct her, how did no one else in the apartment complex notice? So the parking lot of the Key Apartments was fairly small, and as previously mentioned, had windows facing the parking lot. So anyone stalking Jodi could have easily been seen.
Yeah, like I don't know if it's just a case of people are kind of minding their own business, like no one's like kind of worried about what's going on with other people, but in like a small community, it's kind of unusual that if someone had been like following her for so long to like see all of this that like no one else had noticed, you know?
Mm-hmm. In October 1994, 9 months before Jodi's disappearance, Jodi made a police report about a small white truck following her. Her friends and family said she was pretty shaken up, and the officer who took the report gave her some safety tips, but doesn't really seem like anything came of it. Jodi had also mentioned to Amy one time that she thought someone was following her while she was out rollerblading. So Jodi enrolled in a self-defense class 2 months before she disappeared. She told the instructor she felt someone had been following her and she wanted to protect herself. She also wrote a letter to her friend Kelly that arrived after she disappeared, where she mentioned taking a self-defense class and said you could never protect yourself enough. So again, kind of, she's been receiving weird phone calls prior to disappearance. So like, are all of these incidents connected? Is it a red herring? Like, what is it here? So Jodi always carried a tote bag to work with all of her belongings. Being on air meant she would often do her hair and makeup at the news station, so she didn't have to get ready at home when you're getting up early. So she would carry a lot of things with her to work, just a tote bag full of everything, basically.
Like all the things you need to put on all of your makeup and get your hair ready and wear a dress. And I don't know if you guys have watched any of the like local news anchors, meteorologists who do like the get ready with me's on like TikTok, but like it's like they put so much time into getting ready. I love watching those, but anyway.
And while her belongings were scattered in the parking lot, her tote bag wasn't there and has never been located. Jodi also wore 2 rings that have never been found, and some speculated that Jodi would have been wearing a red dress the day she went missing because she had red heels and she often liked to match her shoes to her dresses. She also carried an address book with her, and that was not located either. So a news conference on July 1st was the first time police publicly classified Jodi's disappearance as an abduction. They also announced they were looking for a mid-'80s model white Ford van that was seen outside Jodi's apartment complex. They asked for anyone who had information about this van to come forward. 2 separate witnesses called in tips to police about this van. One man was on his way to work at about 3:50 that morning and reported seeing a white van parked in front of Jodi's apartment complex. He drove that way every day and had never seen it before, which is why it stood out to him. Like if you're seeing the same thing every day and you're like, oh, that's new. I haven't seen that. That's different.
Yeah, definitely.
And especially at that time, I'm assuming things aren't changing that much. It's 3:50 in the morning. It's
most people are in bed at that point. So anything that you see, it's not like, oh, someone had a friend. I mean, that could be, but again, like you said, if you see the same thing every day, and especially that time of day, you probably don't have a lot of traffic, so you're probably kind of bored. So you're probably just like
looking around at anything you possibly can.
Yeah.
And a woman who lived across from Jodi's apartment complex also said she woke up around 4:30 the morning Jodi disappeared and remembered hearing a car door. She said it was usually quiet in this area and this stood out to her, so she actually got up and looked out the window and saw a white or light colored van parked in the street next to Jodi's apartment complex. She remembered it because people usually don't park in the street in front of the complex. It's an odd place for people to park. She didn't see or hear any people, so she went back to sleep. And she did hear a second car door shutting right as she was falling asleep, but she didn't see anything. When she woke up a few hours later, the van was gone. And despite decades of asking for more information about this van, no one has come forward to say it was them, and no leads from others have ever panned out.
Which is interesting too, if you were innocently in that area and it was your van, no one has come forward to be like, oh, I was, my name is Sally. I was visiting my brother at this apartment and this is where I live and this is my van's information. So it's interesting that with all of the media this received locally, that no one would have come forward if it was not a nefarious situation,
Yeah, definitely. There have been many suspects over the years, but no one has ever been charged with her kidnapping. Many of Jodi's friends and acquaintances have been polygraphed over the years, and police have followed thousands of leads. Jodi was legally declared dead in 2001, and in 2003, local news journalists started findjodi.com to collect information about the case and encourage the public to come forward and share any information they have. So the most popular suspect, especially to the locals in the area, is Jodi's friend, John Van Cise. So we've already mentioned him before because he did speak to police at the crime scene that morning, told them Jodi had come to his house the night before. So Jodi and John were pretty good friends and spent a good amount of time together. John was in his 50s and met Jodi when they were both fairly new to Mason City. And John went to William Penn College and got married at 23 years old and had a couple of kids. He and his wife divorced, and that's when he moved to Mason City to just kind of get a fresh start. He's like, I don't want to be with those kids anymore. And I'm just kidding. He's like, bye.
Okay, see you later. Going to start my new life as a bachelor over here.
So they actually lived in the same apartment complex for a while, but John had moved to a new house about 7 months before Jodi's disappearance. So John was one of the friends Jodi went to Iowa City with the weekend before she disappeared. John's son was living in Iowa City for school, and he bought a house for him and some roommates to live in. So Jodi, John, and their friend Tammy stayed at John's son's house while they were water skiing for the weekend. And Tammy said everything was normal between them that weekend, no awkwardness, no fighting, nothing that stood out to her.
Mm-hmm.
So some of Jodi's friends said that John had feelings for her, but she made it clear that they were just friends. John's boat was named Jodi, which a lot of people were like, this shows his feelings for Jodi. Or, maybe it was just someone he valued as a really close friend,
Yeah.
It's a fresh start. And it's you were my person when I had no one. So
exactly.
I definitely get how there might have been unrequited love here, but also can we normalize men and women being friends with nothing else?
Exactly. It could have just been a close friendship. And no one really knows if Jodi was aware. No one mentions remembering if Jodi was aware, because it's oh, she knew about it. Obviously that's a different, it's she's not, she doesn't see anything wrong with the situation. We don't know,
Yeah. And it's unclear if his boat was named Jodi before or after she went missing also. So they're did he name it after, in remembrance, or because he did something? Who knows?
Yeah, because I feel that's a big thing too. It's oh, if one of your close friends went missing, and you're oh, I'm miss her, I'm gonna name my boat after her. That doesn't feel very weird to me. I don't know.
Yeah, that feels kind of normal if it was after.
Yeah.
Especially an in remembrance kind of thing.
Exactly.
But,
yeah.
And it could be suspicious, but I also
definitely.
I feel some people would definitely look at that and be he loved her. He did it. And it's well, maybe not.
Yeah. Or, maybe he did love her, but still didn't do it. That is also a possibility.
That's also a possibility. Or maybe he did it. I don't know.
Right. Exactly. Who knows? But you're right. It doesn't definitely show that he was in love with her or anything just because he would name his boat after her. Wow.
Mm-hmm. So police were suspicious after he arrived at the apartment complex that morning and seemed to kind of insert himself into the investigation. That's kind of odd. Sometimes people do. But if his story is true, he's also the last person to see Jodi alive. So he's also probably I gotta let everybody know where I am, where I was.
Yeah.
He stated she came to his house around 8 p.m. that night. And police have said they aren't sure if Jodi went by John's house on her way home from the golf tournament before calling her friend Kelly at 8:24 p.m. or if she went back out after calling Kelly. So they're not sure where the Kelly phone call falls in line with going to John's house.
Yeah, because they said that people remembered her leaving. I think it was around like 7:50 or so is when they remembered her like leaving the golf tournament. But like they didn't really specify like where John lives in relation to where she lives and where the tournament is. But I mean, it is plausible if you just like went to his house, just watched the video and went straight home. I mean, you know, or that she went after the phone call. And like I said, he probably doesn't remember the exact time. He's like, oh, it was like around 8, which could be 7:45 or, you know, 8:50. Like, who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So John also drew attention when he went on the show A Current Affair a few days after Jodi's disappearance and talked about her in the past tense. He also mentioned that she had told him about being stalked while jogging, but he said in another interview he didn't know anything about Jodi being stalked.
And John's friend, LaDonna Woodford, has also provided kind of an alibi for him the morning Jodi went missing. So LaDonna says that they would sometimes go on walks like in the morning before work. So on June 27th, she called John between 6 and 6:30 and asked him if he wanted to go walk that morning. She said that John told her he was still in bed and hadn't had his coffee yet, but he's like, okay, like I'll walk if you can come to my house. So we had time to like kind of get up and wake up. So they met up shortly after and walked for about 30 to 60 minutes. And one of LaDonna's friends from work would also walk with them sometimes. So LaDonna stopped like during their walk to call the friend from a payphone to let her know they were walking in a different location than they normally walked because they went to John's house first. So the call that she initially made to John that morning and then also the call from the payphone were both like they looked at phone records to like verify her story for both of those phone calls. So they know that she did make those phone calls. So they know that part of her story is accurate, basically. So we know Jodi disappeared sometime after 4:10 a.m. So that only leaves about 2 hours. Like if John is responsible, this only leaves about 2 hours for him to abduct Jodi, murder her, and then dispose of her body somewhere that it has still never been located. So while it is possible, that's a pretty short time frame to like be able to do so, and then also like just go on a casual walk with your friend. Like it's tight, you know?
It's kind of a tight window.
Yeah. But I mean, still possible. Like definitely not out of, you know, the realm of possibility. But John and Jodi's mutual friend Tammy like also says that it doesn't make any sense for John to wait outside of her apartment to abduct her when he easily could have like lured her somewhere in another way because they were friends and like she would have willingly like gone with him, which to me like
she was like literally at his house the night before.
Exactly. Like that.
So why
that stuck out to me.
Why wouldn't he just take her then?
Exactly.
You know?
And no one else knows about her being there. So it's like they only have that information because he told police that. So it's like, if it was him, why would he not have? Or like, hey, let's meet up at this park and there's just so many other ways that he could have gone about. Like it doesn't, I mean, I don't know, maybe this guy did it, but to me that like stood out as something that I'm like, I think that's a big indicator that maybe it wasn't him, because why would you risk being seen like in this like small parking lot where the windows face the car, where you're having to wait over an hour later than usual because she's running late. Like it doesn't really make sense.
The apartment complex they both lived in too, so possible neighbors who know him and could identify him. So that also doesn't make sense why you would come back somewhere where people know you to abduct them.
Yeah. So to me, I'm like, that's a good point. Like they were friends. Like he could have easily gotten her to go somewhere else if this was his plan. Some also believe that John Van Cise was the John that called the newsroom the morning Jodi disappeared, but that's never been confirmed. But also, and I'm not trying to like just defend this guy, but like some of these things don't line up for me. But I'm like, okay, so if he's watching the 6 a.m. broadcast that his friend Jodi always anchors and she's not on there, why wouldn't he call there and be like, where's Jodi? Is she okay? Is she sick? Like, that makes perfect sense to me. Like, that doesn't seem weird to me.
I mean, that's very true. I don't know why he wouldn't admit that he was the one who called.
Yeah. And
unless I mean, maybe it's because like people think he's a suspect and he's like, well, I don't need to damn myself anymore. But I mean, that could make sense if he's up at around 6. He's trying to get his coffee before the walk, turns it on. Where's Jodi? She didn't tell me anything about not being on today. So could make sense.
Yeah. So a grand jury did meet in 1997, like for evidence against John Van Cise, but they did not return an indictment on him. He has publicly stated that he passed 2 polygraph tests. Mason City Police Department have confirmed that he was given 2 polygraph tests, but they cannot legally share the results. But again, we know polygraphs aren't like admissible or anything, so they're like, oh, we can only say that yes, he has been administered 2 polygraph tests.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2017, police executed a search warrant for GPS data on 2 of John's cars, but nothing incriminating was found. He was also subpoenaed to testify in front of a grand jury, and his fingerprint and palm prints were requested. But again, no indictment was returned. And the grand jury proceedings are not public, so we don't know what information they had to like seek the indictment, but he was not indicted.
So they could do GPS tracking back in the 90s?
Okay, so I think they said it was, yeah. So they said it was vehicles that he did not own at that time. They were like new vehicles. So I don't know if they thought like he was like visiting a location, like where she.
Okay, that makes. I thought it was.
I should have included that. Yeah,
from like back then, and I was like, cars in the 90s. How did they have GPS tracking? I mean, I guess that can make sense to see. Like, is he going back to like where her body would be? I guess. But
yeah, I should, because I thought the same thing when I first heard it, and I should have included that. My bad. But yeah, so it was his current vehicles that like he did not own at the time that she went missing, but maybe they had some reason to believe that he's the one that did it, that he like was visiting where her remains were or something.
Mm-hmm.
John used to speak to the media often, but he has declined interviews for many years, which could indicate guilt or could also be an innocent person who's like, nah, like the media's vilified me for years, like I'm not speaking to them anymore. Because again, he is like the quote favorite suspect for a lot of people, for the locals in the area. So don't really blame him for not being willing to speak to the media anymore. He did release a public statement in 2019, which is the first time he has in a long time, just saying again that he had nothing to do with Jodi's disappearance and that he has been living in suspended hell for 25 years because he has been such a main suspect in this case. He also said that he has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. So he's like, I want to make this statement while I can, basically. Mm-hmm. So another suspect is a man named Dustin Honkin. So Dustin was from North Iowa and received a scholarship to study math and science in college in 1991. And during his first year in college, he started selling drugs for money and then started using his science and chemistry knowledge to manufacture and sell meth. So it's real quick, 180, 360, whatever here.
Is this Breaking Bad?
Right, exactly. I mean, kind of. We'll get to that. So he dropped out of school and moved to Tucson, Arizona. He did enlist the help of 2 local dealers in Iowa to keep selling meth to his clients that lived there after he moved. And one of his dealers, Greg Nicholson, was arrested and agreed to a plea deal in exchange for providing police information about Dustin Honkin. So he spoke to Dustin about their operation while wearing a wire, which did lead to Dustin's first arrest in 1993. So Greg Nicholson started dating a woman named Lori Duncan, who had 2 kids, and Dustin Honkin found out that Greg was the one who snitched on him. And right before Greg was scheduled to testify against Dustin, he disappeared from his house along with Lori and her 2 kids. So this led to Dustin's drug charges being dropped because police didn't have any other evidence against him. But Dustin was arrested again the next year on drug charges and was sentenced to 27 years in prison. And it would be 7 years before anyone found out what happened to Greg Nicholson, Lori Duncan, and her 2 children. So Dustin's girlfriend, Angela Johnson, said they knocked on Greg and Lori's door, and Dustin barged in and bound all 4 of them and drove them into the woods. And he then shot all 4 of them and buried them there. And there were rumors that Angela Johnson was working at the Mason City Country Club where Jodi played golf the day before she disappeared, but this has never been confirmed. Like, no one has had like a schedule, or no one said like, oh, I remember her working there. Like, she worked there at some point, but most people are like, I don't think she was working that day. But some people think that Dustin could have been involved in Jodi's disappearance because like maybe she was like investigating the disappearance of Greg, Lori, and the 2 children, because at the time she disappeared, like they had also disappeared, but no one knew what had happened to them. So they're like, oh, like maybe Jodi was like looking into that. But like we already talked about, she wasn't really into investigative journalism. Like, she didn't report on those kinds of stories. Like, that wasn't what she was working on. Again, she had aspirations of being like a national talk show host, like not doing this like heavy, like investigative journalism.
Mm-hmm.
And Dustin Honkin was executed in 2020. And while many believe that he could have been involved, others wonder like why he wouldn't have used this information to make a deal like while on death row, which makes a lot of sense to me. Like if you did this and you're on death row, you could very easily like get your sentence changed if you tell police where she is and what happened to her. So that makes sense to me. Another popular suspect is Tony Jackson. So Jackson was born in Chicago in 1974 and moved to Iowa while he was in high school. He went to Waldorf University in Forest City, Iowa to play basketball. He lived in Mason City and would commute the 40 minutes to school, but he did drop out of college in May of 1995. And while he was living in Mason City, his apartment was 2 blocks from the news station Jodi worked at, and he also worked at the Perkins restaurant that Jodi was known to frequent. They also went to the same bars in town, although it's unsure if they ever like actually met each other. Just friends on both sides are like, oh yeah, they went to like this bar, but we don't really know for sure if they ever interacted. But on June 26, 1995, Jackson left work early after being injured on the job. So he was working at a meatpacking plant at this time. He went to the hospital and left on crutches, and his girlfriend had left him 5 days before and had taken the car that they had together. So he did have to purchase a new car at this time. And he has no alibi for June 27th which was the day Jodi disappeared, because he was at home like with this injury. Then on June 28th, he made an unscheduled visit to his parole officer. So he was currently on parole for a second-degree theft charge. And the parole officer like did find it pretty odd that he just like showed up for a visit unannounced and unscheduled, because, I mean, why would you want to see your parole officer more than you need to? You know, so like this is kind of weird that he would just stop by. And on July 5th, Jackson lost his job at the meatpacking plant.
And in the fall, Jackson enrolled in business school for a few months. He was soon charged with a misdemeanor domestic assault with a firearm. He also attempted death by suicide at some point. On February 2nd, 1997, a 20-year-old woman in Minneapolis was attacked and raped on her way home. There were 5 more similar rapes in that area between February and May 1997, and the last victim was a woman Jackson worked with. So the woman recognized him and told police she believed he was the man who had raped her. He left behind a fingerprint in her bedroom, and DNA would later link him to the first rape victim in February as well. So Tony Jackson was now a convicted serial rapist. A detective on the case called in a tip to the Mason City police because Jackson had lived near Jodi at the time she went missing. So it's like, okay, maybe we got a little connection here. So the detective says that Mason City police said they'd already had their person for Jodi's case, but no one's ever been arrested for Jodi's abduction. So it seems like they didn't even really try. There are also recorded phone conversations from jail where Tony Jackson brings up Jodi to the person he's talking about. Or talking to, sorry. A woman who would frequently jog near Jodi's apartment said she was almost hit by a car speeding away from the direction of Jodi's apartment complex on the morning she disappeared. So the car she described matched the car Jackson had just bought after his girlfriend had taken their car. And a jailhouse informant named Dennis Goff, who was in prison with Jackson, said he told him about raping and murdering an anchor woman. So could be like making it up, but also a lot of things like connecting to him and Jodi.
Yeah.
He claimed Jackson wrote a rap about where Jodi's body was buried. That area was searched, but no remains were found. Mason City police said Tony Jackson has officially been cleared based on interviews, polygraphs, and crime lab analysis. So that's what they say.
That's what they claim. Yes. I don't know.
Thomas Corskadden was also interviewed by police in connection to Jodi. He was a convicted sex offender, but police didn't initially find anything to link him to Jodi. So years later, Thomas mentioned Jodi voluntarily in an interview, and in 2004, when he was scheduled to be released from prison, police obtained a search warrant. So he drove a van similar to the one seen by witnesses at Jodi's apartment that was destroyed in a fire after Jodi's disappearance. So an informant said that Thomas also said one time that Jodi was dead. So he's kind of making comments. I guess a lot of people are at this time. Like all these suspects are just talking about her.
Yeah, very strange. But I mean, it was a very high profile case. So, yeah, not unusual, but yeah.
Jodi had also mentioned some weird phone calls to some friends before she disappeared, and Thomas's daughter remembers her father leaving threatening messages on her mom's answering machine while she was growing up. So she's like, I've heard him do this before. It wouldn't surprise me if like he did it to Jodi as well.
Yeah, like she's like, this is like within his behavior.
She also remembered him watching the news Jodi was anchoring. However, police were still not able to find anything that would connect him to Jodi's abduction, and he did die on January 12th, 2022. While not a suspect, Jodi had a close friend who died suspiciously 2 months before Jodi's disappearance, and some investigators have wondered if the same person could have been responsible for both. So, Billy Pruin was 41 years old and a divorced father of two daughters who were 10 and 12 years old. So, he was a farmer and a businessman. So, he and Jodi were friends and would frequent the same bar scene. And on April 3rd, 1995, Billy was out late with friends watching the UCLA and Arkansas basketball game, and he got home around 11:30 p.m. The next day, he met with his bank about a loan for a new tractor for his farm. And on April 5th, he picked up the tractor and was supposed to go to an event at his daughter's school that night, but never showed up. So the next day, his mother was concerned because she still hadn't heard from him. So she went to the house and found him dead inside from a gunshot wound. So Jodi and the rest of Billy's friends and family were obviously stunned and saddened by this news. He had been shot by his own gun, and police did eventually rule it a death by suicide. However, people who knew him didn't believe he was suicidal, and like he had just bought a new tractor the day before and had gone through all of this paperwork to get a loan for a tractor. So like, why would you get like into major debt before deciding to, do this? Like, doesn't fully make sense.
And it's just so much like administrative tasks of like, why would you put yourself through all of that if like this was your plan,
The bullet that shot Billy struck the kitchen ceiling and then fell to the floor, appearing that he was shot at an upward angle, which doesn't really make sense with the death by suicide. However, one expert believed that Billy had accidentally shot himself, like maybe cleaning the gun goes, something happened.
He went into like a lot of detail, but I don't understand weapons enough to like understand it, to like be able to regurgitate it. But he basically said that like in some way that it was like fired, that he was like, I don't think this was like pushed with like how you would normally fire a gun. Well, it was a very strange, like I think it was almost like he like tripped and like it went off. Like he went into a lot of details, but he's like, I'm pretty sure this was an accident and not a murder or a suicide.
Yeah. So some still wonder if Billy was murdered and if this was somehow related to Jodi's disappearance, but nothing's definitively linked the two. Billy's daughters have also come forward saying that they wish these rumors would stop and they wish their dad would be honored for his own life instead of just constantly being associated with Jodi's disappearance, which I'm sure is so frustrating.
Yeah, like I went back and forth on whether or not to include that information, but I'm like, it's such a big part of the story, like so many places, like when you research it, that it feels like incomplete to leave it out. But I did want to like heavily emphasize that his daughters are like, please stop making the assumption that he had anything, that there was any connection between them, because like these are two separate cases, and they're like, anytime you like Google my dad's name, they're like, it only like comes up in relation to Jodi Huisentruit. They're like, we can't like remember him for who he was because like he's now like forever tied to her. But like also like a lot of people still think that this is a possibility that they were connected. So I'm like, I just kind of, I went back and forth. So I want to throw that out there. So if you're mad at me for including it, I'm sorry. That's why I did include it.
And be sure to write those emails to Jacqueline. I'm just kidding. Don't at me. No, I'm just kidding. We're one podcast. We stand by our decision.
we're one person. Okay, not even a podcast.
We've just morphed into each other.
Yes.
In 2008, a reporter for the Mason City Globe Gazette received an anonymous package that turned out to be a copy of Jodi's personal journal. So the first entry was dated January 1994, and the last entry was 2 days before her disappearance. So the Globe Gazette wasn't sure what to do because they didn't know who had sent this, for what purpose, but they did decide, let's just go ahead and publish some excerpts in the newspaper. Like, let's just go ahead.
Which I don't understand. I don't understand that, like, thought process. I don't know if at this point, because obviously it's many years later, so that maybe they're just like, well, any information we can get out to the public will be helpful. Like maybe we'll get some tips somehow from someone who reads Jodi's journal. Like obviously they like carefully selected what they included, but I'm like, I don't get the thought behind this. Like this feels very invasive and like just not okay.
I feel like it doesn't help,
No.
you
Like
know?
what was your motive here? I don't understand.
Yeah. And it later came out that a former police chief took a copy of the journal home when he cleaned out his desk during his last day of work, and his wife found it and mailed it into the newspaper.
Mm.
Okay, great logic.
Like
So the police
what?
chief's wife had worked at the Globe Gazette 20 years before, but nobody knows what her motive is in sending the journal to the newspaper, especially if I'm like, obviously there's nothing in this journal that's like helped investigators at all to
Mm-hmm.
this point. So what do you think publishing it in the newspaper is going to do?
Like I just don't understand. Like, does she know something that she's like, I'm trying to share this information with the world, or like is she just think she's trying to be helpful when I really just cannot understand this whole situation at all.
Yeah, it's very weird.
Yeah.
And investigative reporters have reached out to her, but she does not comment. So, for a while, there was a misconception that blood was found at the scene and that DNA testing could possibly give some answers in this case. But in 2013, detectives confirmed that no blood was found at the scene. So, nothing there. Jodi's hairbrush was recovered for her DNA, and so she is in the national database so that her DNA will be compared against any Jane Does who were found. So hopefully, like one day, if someone is found, it can link it. And many tips have come in over the years. Many digs have been done in areas someone believes her body could be in, but no other evidence of her has ever been found. So the Find Jodi organization has spoken with a few new witnesses who did not previously come forward. So one woman said that she lived in Jodi's apartment building and she had gotten home from work after an 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift and saw the police. So the officer asked her if she knew who owned the red sports car and asked what apartment the owner lived in. So the witness also said she had complained to the apartment manager about a creepy man that lived in the campground next to the key apartments. He drove a gray car and would sometimes park it in the parking lot of the apartment complex, and she never saw it again after Jodi disappeared. So that could be kind of suspicious if someone is stalking Jodi, that
Mm-hmm.
he's at the campground, he's watching her, and then never seen again after she disappears.
Yeah.
They also spoke to the apartment manager who verified this story, although she remembers the car as being dark green. And another anonymous witness says she woke up to a loud noise in the middle of the night and she went outside to look. She said several other residents came out of their apartments and were looking around as well. She said there was a vehicle with lights on in the parking lot, but they didn't see or hear anything else, so they went back to bed.
Which I'm like, okay, so why did you not tell police this 30 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand unless they're like, oh, well, we didn't really see anything, so we don't know. And it's like, but again, like any little information you do have could be helpful. It's like you never know what like tiny piece of
Mm-hmm.
information could like put everything all together. So I don't know if they're just like, oh, like we just saw a car with lights on. I don't even know what kind of car it was. Well, there's no point in reporting that. Or, it could be the bystander effect where they're like, oh, there were several of us out there. I know someone else called and no one did. And
Yeah, I'm sure someone else told the police. And
yeah,
maybe with the woman with like the creepy man, she was like, well, I've told my apartment manager and police are interviewing him, so,
yeah.
or her, and then maybe they can just relay it.
But I'm also like, after so many years, like, is your memory accurate? Like, did that really happen?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's tough.
Yeah. So, a FBI profiler who did not work on the case was interviewed on the Find Jodi podcast to see if she had any insight about who abducted Jodi. She didn't want to guess too much without having access to all the police files, but she believed the person either lived alone or was easily able to make an excuse for being gone at 4:30 in the morning. Either they didn't worked later in the day, or called in that day because they stayed and waited for Jodi, even though she was running an hour late to work that morning. She believes a lack of blood at the scene could indicate that Jodi was grabbed quickly and was not seriously injured in the process before she was kidnapped. She also believes that whoever took Jodi went to her apartment that morning with the intention of kidnapping her. She doesn't think it was someone just like waiting to talk to her and the argument got heated and led to the abduction because she thinks the witnesses would have heard loud arguing, commotion, if that was the case. So they don't think it was any of that.
Like if it was like an escalation, like there would have been a lot more like commotion versus just someone who was like waiting solely for the purpose of abducting her, and then she comes out and they immediately grab her, you know.
So the Find Jodi organization currently has a $25,000 reward for any information about what happened to Jodi Huisentruit. In recent years, they put up billboards around Mason City, Iowa, with Jodi's picture, asking anyone to report any tips they have. They also host a yearly memorial golf tournament in Jodi's name. If you have any information about the disappearance of Jodi Huisentruit, please contact the Mason City Police Department at 641-421-3636 or reach out to the Find Jodi organization at findjodi, JODI.com or Find Jodi Inc. Facebook page.
Yeah, and that is the very mysterious disappearance of Jodi Huisentruit, and her body has never been found. No, like we said, the tote bag that she had, her address book, her rings, like nothing connected to her has ever been found. I don't know, like none of those. I mean, I feel like Tony Jackson is the most like, what's the word I'm looking for? To me, like I feel like the most clues line up for him, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't know. And he did say something too, that they mentioned where, because he's currently in prison, and it's another one of those like, well, why wouldn't I tell you if I did it, because I'm already here forever for all these other crimes. But he was like, you don't think a like tall black man struggling with a white woman in a parking lot would be remembered? And I was like, And then one of the, I can't remember her name, but one of the journalists who like worked on this case was like, that's just a weird statement to make. And I'm like, no, I mean, not really though. Like I see where he's like, that kind of makes sense to me. Like he's like, I would be noticed like kidnapping this white, like if someone were to see me, like that, you know what I mean?
And
so
if someone was around the if he was like,
if he was stalking,
like stalking her, waiting outside the apartment complex, like I feel like people would have noticed more likely. Yeah, I mean, it was very early in the morning. If this was like a one-off that maybe nobody just saw him because nobody was up, like it is such a weird time in the morning where it's like people are half asleep or they're not, you know what I mean? Like it's just so hard. Like people aren't up and around, so it's just kind of hard to know for sure.
Because it's like maybe you were able to like stalk her this whole time without being noticed because, like you said, the time of day that it is. And, you know, I really do think that someone waited this whole time, you know, like we talked about, like she was running late. So like that person had to have like been waiting for her that entire time. I don't know. It definitely feels more like stranger to me versus someone that she knows. Especially going to the risk of like waiting outside that whole time. Yeah, I don't know. It's
very odd and just like crazy that like she's never been found. No trace of her has ever been found. Like nothing at all. It's like, where is she? Like what happened? It's just so sad.
And it's like obviously like her poor family, like her mom, her sister, like to never have any kind of closure of, you know, like I just want to know what happened to her. You know, like I said, they do have those billboards up currently. Trying to get anyone to, and that's how they've gotten, you know, these new interviews with people who've like shared some things now. So like, yes, like keep doing this. And they said anytime they, you know, something new comes out, like the 2020 episode that came out here recently, and anything new that comes out, they receive like a whole bunch of new tips. So like, that's great. If you know, if you guys live in this area, if you have family members who lived in that area at that time, you know, please, if they know anything, again, and if it's something that you think doesn't mean anything, just call it in instead. Like it doesn't hurt to give them that information, because something might be the one thing they're waiting on that can like put all the pieces together and help them at least have closure to know what happened to Jodi. Yeah. And they did mention in the podcast that like this case has drawn a lot of attention like from the media because like she was one of them, you know, so like journalists are like, she was part of our team, like she was one of us. So like, and a lot of them are talking about, you know, leaving for work at, you know, 3 a.m. and they're like, that's me. Like I do that every day. So like this one really stuck with me because that could easily be me. And of course you had the whole aspect of like that, what's the word? The parasocial relationship. Is that what it's called? Where like you think you have a relationship with like someone who like you don't.
I'm not sure what it's called, but
I think that's what it is.
It makes me think of like like you were saying about that, like the Kim Wall case where they were like,
Yes.
she just went on like a normal like interview thing where it's like, we would have done this. Like this should have been her softball one. Like she's out here in like North Korea doing interviews. This should have been like a softball in her backyard, and then it happens.
Exactly. Yeah. It is parasocial relationship. So basically like someone like thinking that they have a relationship because they've watched her for so long, like, you know, as a show host, like she's sharing like little tidbits of her life and things like that. And like to a person who's like listening, it's like, oh, you're like squirreling away all of this information, like thinking that like you have this kind of relationship because it's a one-sided relationship and like you don't really have it. So where was I going with that? Oh yeah, so the journalists who were like really digging into this case and like trying to get answers that started this organization, they're like, we understand those types of relationships, like we've experienced this, and you know, so it really just hits home with a lot of them, which is why it's still getting so much attention, you know, all these years later. So yeah. All right. So that being said, Courtney, what is your perk of the week?
So my perk of the week is that Kevin and I recently started a new show. We started Ozark. I know we're so behind, but really enjoying it so far. We have like 20 minutes left in the season 1 finale, so probably going to finish that up.
Sorry to cut you off mid-episode. You could have finished it.
No, it's okay. You have to get up early, so I was like, I'll finish this later. It's fine. So, yeah, but I think there's only like 4 seasons, so we just finishing up season 1. I'm really excited to see like where the show goes. Like I really like it so far. It's really good. And I'm sure everyone's already watched it by now. But if you haven't and you've been looking for a sign to, here's your sign to watch it.
Okay, I will.
So, there you go. Very good. Very interesting.
Nice.
But yeah, that is my perk of the week. Jacqueline, what's your perk of the week?
So my perk of the week is that last night, Andrew and I took our daughter on just like a little family date night kind of thing, which is really nice because like, you know, since we moved here, like we're busy like all the time. Like we have plans with like people all the time, which is great and it's fun and we love it. But I was like, yeah, it's been a long time since like just the 3 of us like went out and, you know, did something. So, you know, we went out and got pizza and then we got donuts and Millie got to have her first donut because she has been allergic to eggs and is no longer allergic to eggs, which I feel like is its own perk of the week. I should have mentioned that a few weeks ago. But, so yeah, so she can have eggs now. So she got to have a donut for the first time and was all about it. And now anytime we ask her about it, she just talks about the rainbow because it had rainbow sprinkles. So that was her favorite part. So it had rainbow sprinkles. But yeah, it was nice and just got to have a little family night, just the 3 of us, and get some yummy food and just get to relax and hang out. Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice.
So if you guys want to tell us what you think happened in this case, what are your theories? Where am I going with this? Your TV shows that you're watching, the dates you like to go on, you guys know the drill. Just, you know, your random thoughts, send them our way. All of our stuff, socials and all that good stuff are in the show notes if you want to know where to find us. As always, patreon.com/caffeinated crimes is the best place to find us. And you can just toss a few dollars our way. And we have all kinds of bonus episodes ready and waiting there for you.
We will be at CrimeCon in September. I said I'm going to say it every week because you guys might come. I don't know.
Yes.
And if you could also give us just 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening on, whether that's Apple, Spotify, give us a thumbs up on YouTube, subscribe, you know, leave a nice comment because sometimes people are mean and it's just nice to see the nice ones come in.
Yeah.
But that would be greatly appreciated. But in the meantime, go have a cup of coffee.
And don't commit a crime.